Story 1. It's not all that easy to decide when to start this story. A story that I'm not even sure is mine. Is it my experience? Sure it is. But I'm far from being the main character here, just as this won't be the main story. No, this tale will be just one of hundreds, thousands of stories that come together as the history of a single thing, a timeless legend. And I will be nothing but another witness. And, thankfully, not another victim. Here I am. I live to tell the tale. My experience with Skinwalkers. In a few words, Skinwalkers are a terrifying legend from Native American culture, mostly from the Navajo tribe. They are said to be a type of witch, an evil-doing creature capable of taking different forms and causing a lot of harm. For Navajo people, the Skinwalkers are very serious business. They are far from simple tales they have to tell little kids to get them to behave. The reason? I would come to learn about that very well because the rest of America, well, we're not so careful about these things. Not until we learn the lesson. And, very often, in the worst possible ways. Now, as this is my one humble contribution to the legend that's immeasurably older than me and will certainly live longer than I will, I get to focus on the details that all the countless stories don't have. My personal journey. If I could pinpoint a moment in time when this story started for me, it would be way back in high school. I was an outsider, an aggressively introverted nerd that cared a little too much about reading. Luckily for me, I wasn't the only weirdo in town, and I somehow managed to make 3 very good friends. They were all as odd as me. In contrast to my shy, bookworm personality, there was a fiery and brilliant girl that read just as much, and additionally got into heated arguments about whatever subject at least once a day, with anybody foolish enough to fight with her. Then there were the twins, 2 boys that were actually not family at all, simply best friends attached at the hip since they were in diapers, so they were nicknamed as such. The twins were competitive, daring each other to do all kinds of things little boys do, and then some. Like most children, they went through all the messy phases of eating dirt, catching bugs, and rolling in mud. And then, puberty hit. Instead of growing out of the weird, they grew into it, and their interests extended to the strange, the forbidden, the unexplainable, the uncomfortable, and dangerous. It just so happened that they befriended the only people at the school that were interested in spending the afternoon devouring books and encyclopedias on any subject, no matter how dark, and scavenging the least respectable corners of the public library, which resulted in the 4 of us becoming the local weirdo experts in conspiracy and supernatural theories. Names are a little bit of a tricky business when sharing stories of this kind, but you can think of me as Alex, the opinionated researcher you can call Alice, and the boys that grew into men I'll refer to Lewis and Charlie. Inseparable, Alice and I went on into college to study journalism. Charlie got into film studies, but he quit before reaching the halfway mark for reasons that, although I never told him, I was sure were related to the not-so-reasonable influence of Lewis, who didn't amount to much of anything after high school save for a couple of wild short stories published here and there. Most people can relate to the feeling of growing distant from your childhood best friends, but most people would also agree that if those best friends ever came knocking on your door with a problem, you'd be there for them. Alternatively, if those loved friends from your past showed up unannounced with an adventurous invitation, some might jump into the train of nostalgia and go along with it. It might lead to unwise decisions taken in Las Vegas, or a tearful road trip through your hometown. In our case, Lewis and Charlie managed to convince Alice and me to join them on a trip to Skinwalker Ranch, also known as Sherman Ranch. It is a property in Utah known to be the location of intense, constant, and diverse strangeness. UFO sightings, supernatural scares, and as its name clearly states, plenty of encounters with skinwalkers. The thing is, Lewis and Charlie never gave up their obsession with the mysterious and the treacherous darkness that lurked in the corners of society that people aren't meant to touch. After leaving film studies, Charlie got together with Lewis to create a couple of short films on something extraterrestrial and something paranormal, and both were met with awful critics, if not just straight-up mockery. The way they dragged us into the project was by claiming they were ready to finally put out a serious, respectable, well-made documentary on the history of the ranch itself. It combined their fascination with taboo subjects and our passion for research in a good argument. Maybe we should have been more anxious about the whole thing. The problem was that neither Alice nor me were particularly scared of whatever could possibly cross our path in Skinwalker Ranch. Despite being almost alarmingly knowledgeable in all matters of supernatural threats because of course we did massive amounts of research before the trip, we were still a pair of skeptics. We knew every case, we watched every picture and video, read every account of frightening events that were available to us. But to us, it was just data. It lacked the brutal punch to the gut of being a certain reality. I think back then neither of us would have believed anything about the mysterious ranch was real, unless we were personally in the laboratory where the creatures would be dissected to pieces to be studied, analysed and understood. That, of course, was impossible, and our thoughts were soon to be turned upside down. Although, to be brutally honest, I can admit I feared right from the start the whole project would be a disappointment of great proportions that I wouldn't want to be linked to my name. Luckily for the twins, though, Alice and I were recently graduated and mostly unemployed, save for some lame freelancing jobs. I don't know where Lewis and Charlie got their money, but it was enough to get all four of us to Utah and as close to Skinwalker Ranch as possible, all with a smile on our faces. How was I to know that these two lovable creeps with zero self-preservation instinct that I hadn't seen in years would be our biggest problem? The plan was simple. Road trip to Utah, stay as close to Skinwalker Ranch as possible, collect and review all the information we could, go out camping, and record all necessary visuals to make up a pretty decent documentary. If I stopped too long to think about how easy it should have been, I feel like I could lose my mind. It started all right. It always does on things like this, doesn't it? The boys paid a man named Henry so we could stay in his house. A small property sort of in the middle of nowhere, but the closest thing we could get to the infamous ranch. There, we would have all the necessary comforts of beds, bathrooms, hot meals, internet, and a phone service. This man Henry was friendly enough, and he seemed normal enough for someone that willingly lived next to one of the weirdest places in America. We stayed at his house just one day, sharing thoughts, ideas, and scary stories, obviously. That's when I started to suspect our two friends weren't as interested in a proper documentary as they had previously said. Then there was day 2, and things immediately started to go downhill from there. Charlie wanted to get started on recording footage, and because of some of the difficult-to-articulate feelings of adventure or friendship, we all tagged along. Because he wanted to get as close to the ranch as possible, we would walk all the way there, set up camp wherever the night caught us, and stay around there for 1 or 2 nights. The journey started fine enough. We were having fun, thinking, yes, these are my friends. They've always been, and this was a great idea. Thinking, yes, whatever small wild animal we can see in the distance is just that, a harmless thing. Thinking, finally, that we were making just another documentary, and things couldn't go wrong, even if just for a simple reason that we didn't believe things could go wrong. I'm wondering if Charlie and Lewis thought the same way. Maybe not only they thought things actually could go wrong, maybe they were hoping they would, because they would look good on camera or just for the sheer fun of it. Tragically, they were the ones that were correct. As soon as the sun started to go down, we set up our camp. There in the middle of nowhere, and in the general vicinity of a famously mad property. I had expected to light up a fire, get a little drunk, share some stories, laugh with my friends, and have a mildly good night of sleep. I was wrong. There was a fire, there was some drinking, but sharing some stories somehow became an explosive debate on what to do next. Once we were there, Charlie and Lewis insisted like crazy on continuing to explore our surroundings, no matter how late, no matter how dark, no matter how dangerous and extremely unadvisable that would be. There was a pretty big disagreement that ended up in the twins going to their tent angry at us. Something I regret to this day. Alice and I shared another tent. We went to bed upset, realizing that the documentary we set out to make was actually our friend's take on an embarrassing Blair Witch Project movie type of thing, and we had been dragged into it. That wouldn't have been so bad, I think, now. That would have been nice compared to the things that followed. It wasn't my first time camping. I know what a night in the middle of nowhere sounds like. This was nothing like it. The wind wasn't blowing. It sounded more like a growl. It didn't sound like leaves on trees and bushes were moving. It sounded like trunks were being scratched and bushes straight out ripped from the ground. Then there were footsteps. The damn footsteps. Charlie and Lewis got out of their tent at some point, and their aimless drunk pacing around our camp was driving me mad. But there was more. It sounded like they weren't alone, and I want to believe it was only my mind playing tricks on me. But by then, I didn't believe there could be anything out there but wild animals with us. And for the sounds of it, there were plenty of them. I was stressed, but Alice was doing considerably worse, and at that moment, I hadn't figured out why that might be. It was a restless night. We were both awake when we heard Lewis. "I'm leaving," he said, sounding as drunk as he could be, and then some more. "I'm leaving. You can follow me." I started to sit up and go out to at least talk to him, but Alice held me down. Upon questioning, she urged, "He's drunk. We're mad at him. And it's dangerous out there." My answer was along the lines of, "Well, we're not that mad to let him go risk his life out there by himself." But Alice was unyielding. It wasn't until sunrise when we left our tent just to see the twins' tent completely trashed and torn and the boys missing, along with the bottles of alcohol, that my friend's anger exploded, and she explained herself. When doing our research, we had split up our tasks, she reminded me. I focused on the alleged UFO sightings, and she, Skinwalkers. The word made me shiver, even then. She didn't believe in it, she said, but now she was certain Charlie and Lewis had messed up with things they didn't understand, things they couldn't understand, let alone capture on camera. As the two of us started exploring the area, Alice started to explain to me all I had missed about the Skinwalkers. She told me about magic, about witches turned evil, about ceremonies that involve the sacrifice of a loved one, a sibling. She told me about shape-shifting, about wolves and coyotes, about missing people, stolen faces, and glowing red feral eyes. She told me about Navajo people refusing to discuss this terrifying legend out loud with strangers. She didn't have to tell me about our friend's recklessness, insistence, and desperation. I knew. It was all well and fine in the daylight. If I stared a little too suspiciously at a fox that followed us from a safe distance, it was okay. That was on me. The real fright only arrived that night. Instead of staying at the camp, Alice and I decided to go back to Henry's house. At least, that was the plan. We started the journey too late. We were exhausted, stressed, worried, annoyed by the whole situation. The sun went down, and it got dark so quickly. But the moonlight was enough to see the small house in the distance. The moonlight was more than enough to see that awful animal standing there. Suddenly, all other feelings were gone. We weren't too tired. We weren't upset with our friends. We were nothing but mind-blowingly scared. It was an awful beast. Even from a distance, it was the worst thing I've seen. It could have been a coyote. a massive, huge coyote. And I remember thinking there's something wrong with it. There's something awfully wrong with it. It moved like it was sick, like its limbs didn't fit quite right, and its joints looked wrong, standing out at odd angles. And still, as it ran around the house, it was frighteningly fast and steady. When it stood on its rear legs, I swear that thing had to be much taller than the average man. That's how it spent most of its time. Standing tall, with its front legs scratching the walls and front door of the house. Just raising on 2 legs, lunging at the walls and scratching all the way down. Moving with that wobbly quality of a badly put-together, devilishly possessed puppet. Alice refused to tell me if that grotesque animal matched the descriptions of any of the things she had read about. Namely, the Skinwalkers. Why would I need to know then? What use would it have been to know if I was staring right at monsters, at things no longer human, not really natural, but just perverted and evil? It was enough to know it was a wild creature, and we were better staying as far away from it as possible. We couldn't look away from it, fearing that if we lost sight of it, we would suddenly find it upon us. So, avoiding looking at its face, we started carefully walking backward, seeking refuge in the much closer toolshed of the property. There, among the frightening noises of quick footsteps, violent scratches, and the wind groaning all around us, we waited for the sunrise. When the sun came up, and we believed we were safe, we went up to the main house, just to find it empty. The scratches were there, of course, but there was no sign of the owner. No sign of our friends. At least the owner had left a note. He had left early the previous day. Luckily, we had come to that house for internet and phone service, which we had made quick use of, and we got the hell away from that place. 3 days later, Charlie finally answered our desperate calls and messages. It was a simple and cold thing complaining about us leaving without explanation. There was no mention of Lewis, and we didn't find it in ourselves to ask. Our friendship was irreversibly ruined, and all we had left off that trip was a mountain of unfinished business. Charlie didn't publish any documentary. Alice didn't confirm or deny her belief in skinwalkers. And I couldn't, for the life of me, confirm or deny if that horrendous beast I saw that day scratching the walls of a sad empty house in the middle of nowhere, it wasn't a skinwalker, or if it really was. Before I continue to the next story, I just want to say thank you for choosing to watch this video, and I hope you're enjoying my narration. If you are, please show your appreciation by helping this channel to grow by liking this video, subscribing to this channel, and commenting on this video and any other video you like of mine. It really helps the channel to grow. Thanks. Story 2. Up until the day when this story happened, I lived a life where my greatest fear was teenagers. I was well into adulthood, but I remember my teenage years, and I feared the day my little girl of 6 years old would become one of those complicated, incomprehensible, and moody creatures. That was my life. A simple and predictable life with absolutely nothing extraordinary going on around me. It was a good, happy life. Just average, I guess. And I liked it that way. It continues to be pretty much the same. The problem is now, I have a certain awareness. I might not be completely certain, but I'm definitely aware of the existence of things beyond the world I understand. Monsters that don't come out of movies, but out of the darkest corners of human misery. Stories that are not fiction, but lessons. They're warnings. I am now conscious of things that I might never understand, and I hope I never have to deal with, but they have broadened my universe in the worst possible ways. The irony of the whole thing is that I was brought into this experience of transformation of my view on life and fear by facing my previously greatest fear, a teenage boy. As I said, I have a beautiful little girl of 6 years named Angelica. My husband, Tony, has a large family and has always liked kids. That's where he came into the story. Tony's 14-year-old nephew, Luke. That boy intimidated me. I had seen him plenty of times in family reunions, always causing trouble. He was always being scolded for being late, breaking something, saying something inappropriate. My husband, however, thought that behavior was typical of a teenage boy, and we must prepare for it by facing it straight on. We invited Luke to a short road trip over the weekend. It would be easy enough. There's not much that could go wrong inside a moving vehicle. We would stay 2 nights at my family's cabin near Lake Ontario and then come back on Sunday. Nature would be good for the boy, and obviously for our dog, Max, and our little girl loved the cabin. We had absolutely no reason to fear for our lives in any way. Not yet. The trip started as I had personally expected it. My husband and I made most of the convention. Max only looked out the window, and Luke used his phone and ignored little Angelica. Not very nice to watch, but bearable. Tony decided to intervene, though. After a stern conversation, Tony convinced him to, let's say, participate in the trip. I'm not sure if he expected a miracle, but I knew my fears on this strange stage of life between sweet childhood and harsh adulthood were well-founded. Luke acted like a caged bear suddenly poked by a sharp stick. He fought back. He became a nightmare. He started reciting the introduction to our nightmare, and I can't help but feel like both things were linked. I know I shouldn't blame him, and I don't hold a grudge against him, not really, but I feel his spiteful words absolutely influenced the events that would follow. "Uncle, do you like ghosts?" Luke said. That's how it started, with a fake sweet tone and bad intentions. My dear husband, bless his heart, said he liked them. I sent him a warning look. We had a little girl in the car that had never seen any remotely scary movies, and I have no idea what kind of things this problematic boy would say. It started with the usual stuff, regular old ghosts. Whenever he went into too much detail about fictional or legendary people's death, I seriously reminded him of his little cousin's presence, and he attempted to tone it down for a while until my next reminder. At least he was having fun. My husband was happy, and Angelica was thrilled about these new fantastical, even dark worlds. As we reached the halfway mark on our road trip, young Luke's stories started to branch out. Werewolves, vampires, zombies, and demons. The boy was quite the storyteller. He started sharing some folklore stories that I hadn't even heard of, and I was so captivated that for long moments I forgot to protect my own daughter's innocence. Angelica is a smart girl, Tony said. She knows these are just stories. But folklore was a little more fascinating than that, isn't it? There's always a little more truth to those stories. They exist for a reason, and I'd never wanted to think too much of those reasons. Realizing that, against my own will, I had gotten goosebumps during one of the stories, I ordered Luke to stop. It finally clicked in my mind that he was doing these things out of malice. He wanted to terrify Angelica. He wanted to make me nervous and make his own uncle uncomfortable. I tried not to snap at him, remembering at heart he was just a boy. "Look, there's a man on the road," the teenager exclaimed a moment later. I jumped in my seat frightened. I'd expected to see a man's body actually in the middle of the road. But Luke was only referring to a random man walking by the side of the road. My husband slowed down cautiously. But the man didn't pay us any mind. I barely glanced at him. Lanky, bad clothes, probably old. I didn't think it would ignite a whole thing. Tony's nephew reacted unreasonably interested in the lonesome stranger. We should give him a ride. We should offer him help. He's all alone in the middle of nowhere. Luke, complained for a few minutes. Finally, my husband's insistence in the fact that the man didn't ask for a ride or help of any kind, and the fact that we were well past this man, calmed down the young man. But, fine. Can I at least tell one more story then? Luke said. The Wendigo. That's what Luke wanted to tell us about. He collected all his inspiration and gave us his best or worst story yet. It started with a fascinating legend, a warning tale of human greed which isn't exactly among the usual lessons one tries to teach 6-year-old girls. But I let him talk. When Luke started delving into deeper meanings behind the Algonquian legend, I warned him not to speak of things he didn't know about. But the boy seemed frighteningly well informed. An unsettling but not unusual hobby in young boys, studying supernatural myths, some fascination with taboo subjects. But it soon got to be too much. I didn't want my daughter to know about cannibalism. The teenager was unstoppable in sharing all he knew about this monster. Luke talked about hungry demons that possessed people and urged them to eat each other. I complained. Luke talked about isolated men desperately opting for eating another person, and in turn becoming inhuman themselves. My husband complained. Luke talked about a horrifying creature, taller than any man, wandering the forests, looking for victims, hungry for human flesh. Angelica started to cry. He went on and on about this greedy monster, always starving, his skin sticking to his bones, no matter how much he ate. At some point it seemed we were all screaming, trying to silence each other, and nobody could stop him. The boy was fuming, desperately reaching for the worst details he knew, making my own stomach churn in discomfort with the way he described the rotten smell of the Wendigo. The lifeless eyes burrow deep in its skull. Its haunting growls. He even described antlers on its head and tried to tell us details about half-eaten bodies found in these very woods we were driving past. I had never seen my husband so angry or my little girl so terrified. Even the damn dog was barking its head off, and personally, I felt like I was going to throw up. Just then, we heard Angelica scream. "Dad!" she yelled, in that extremely high-pitched voice only little girls are capable of. We all shut up immediately, and Tony aggressively pulled on the brakes. We all jumped in our seats and were immediately thankful for our seatbelts. When Tony questioned Abigail about her outburst, with the most terrified little face possible, she said, "I saw the Wendigo there." That calmed all of us down. We turned to look where she was pointing, and of course, there was nothing but trees there. The sun was barely starting to go down, but there was still enough light to feel safe on our assessment. I caught my husband turning to look at his nephew. His eyes were cold and piercing, and a serious warning. Luke shut up for the rest of the trip, but Angelica didn't. There was a handful more, "There he is," yelled at the windows of the car. We tried to take her fear seriously, look where she pointed and pause, ask, and worry. To make matters worse, at one point it was the boy who cried out, "Ow! She bit me! Angelica bit me! It's the—" Of course, we interrupted him before he even tried to say something outrageous and impossible. In that particular context, it was unsettling. It could have been funny had we been any less distraught, but it was enough to turn the tables on the troubled teenager and make him as uncomfortable as he had made the rest of us. "She's a little kid. Little kids bite," my husband told his nephew. "And you probably deserved it." But there was only so much we could take. We didn't have nerves of steel. I could still feel Luke's words like they were crawling under my skin. Inhumanely tall, putrid smell, endless hunger, human flesh. The words were engraved in my mind, and every 5 minutes I heard my daughter scream of danger. It was a nightmare, and it was only just beginning. I finally arrived at the cabin with a splitting headache. I was accompanied by my husband in the worst mood I've ever seen him in, our daughter frightened of her own shadow, a moody teenager, and even the poor dog looked scared. The sun was setting down over the trees, and to be honest, none of us was in a mood to spend more time outdoors. We locked ourselves in the cabin to spend the night. I can't recall any strange noises, any sounds, sights or smells that would suggest we had any unwanted company with us. My baby couldn't say the same thing. Angelica complained the entire time we were at the cabin. She couldn't get close to the windows or else she'd start screaming, but we never found anything else there. Max was nervous too, which was odd considering he usually loved the cabin. But I guess he could feel something was off considering we didn't let him go outside for reasons. Luke, too, was far from having a good time. His little cousin bit him 1 or 2 more times, and the teenager only stopped himself from throwing supernatural accusations after Tony threatened to tell the boy's parents of his attitude and how he terrorized a 6-year-old girl. Exhausted, physically and emotionally, we all went to bed early. As I tucked Angelica into bed, I had to answer plenty of questions about her safety, about the safety of the room, the house, her closet, and what could be hiding under her bed. All safe, but I couldn't help ask her what she was so afraid of. The man we saw on the road, she told me, but taller and skinny and naked. Very scary. I tried my best to reassure her she was safe, but I was simultaneously holding back tears, grieving for my baby's innocence because of a spoiled kid's imagination and meanness. Nothing else, I told myself. It's nothing more than that. Despite my worries, my darling Angelica slept soundly through the night. In fact, I'd say we all had a good night. Tony and I even woke up in good spirits, confident that yesterday's stress was over. It lasted the entire 10 minutes that it took us getting out of bed and downstairs. Max wasn't home. My husband and I were immediately distraught. Of course, we worried about the poor dog out in the wilderness, but we also had in mind what our daughter's reaction might be, and we knew it wouldn't be good. How had this happened, though? We wondered. We had been so sure we locked all the doors before going to bed. Maybe not all the windows, but was Max really that smart? Could Luke be malicious enough to do such a thing? Surely we would have heard him. Surely Max found a way to escape and there was nothing that could have taken him. At least we were distracted enough by trying to appease Angelica that we couldn't let our thoughts run too far. As expected, Angelica was nearly inconsolable, and Luke emphatically denied having anything to do with our dog's disappearance. The boys spent most of the day wandering the woods around the house searching for Max, while I tried my best to calm and distract Angelica. Being a little child, it wasn't so difficult, and by the time we had lunch, it felt like we could just hang on a little longer and the dog would reappear and everything would be all right. Of course, that didn't happen. Instead, the kids stayed in the house while I joined my husband in the afternoon to look for our missing dog. I threatened Luke. I told him if he left the house or let my daughter leave the house, he would regret it. Then we were off. I tried to stay strong, to be brave, or to pay no mind to the scary stories a teenager had thrown my way the previous day. I tried my best. I really did. And it wasn't enough. I felt like something was near, lurking close to me. I felt like Angelica did the previous day. Like everywhere I looked, I would find hungry eyes waiting. Then there was the smell. That god-awful smell. I immediately felt nauseous, but no matter which way I moved, the smell followed. It was rotten. It was putrid. It was absolutely disgusting. I have no clue what kind of thing that could have made that possible. It couldn't have been a single dead animal nearby. The wind around me made an awful angry noise, and I got goosebumps. But somehow the trees were all very still. What was that sound? What was that smell? Where was my husband? I started to freak out when I realized I couldn't find him. I started moving quicker, and more desperately, until I saw him. Saw it. Saw something, whatever it was. There, in the distance, far away from me. A shadow. Thin, tall, rigid, like a skeleton. I was frozen in fear. I felt I couldn't even breathe. It could just be a tree, I thought. Until it moved. The only damn tree in the whole forest moved. Like a human. Like a monster. Like anyone's worst nightmare. I jumped when I felt a hand on my shoulder, and I turned around frightened. There was my husband, holding our dog's leash, with a small but unmistakable stain of blood there. I didn't dare turn around again. I didn't tell him what I saw, and he didn't have to tell me what to do. We went back to the house, packed our things, and left immediately. We never went back there. Thank you for watching and/or listening to this video. Again, if you enjoyed it, please go ahead and hit the like button, and if you don't already, subscribe to my channel and select the notification bell so you don't miss out on any of my future uploads. Also, please leave a comment on this video letting me know what you thought of it. Comments really help with the YouTube algorithm and will really help my channel to grow. If you have a story you would like me to narrate, please email it to me at stories@daredevil.com. I have recently passed 50,000 subscribers to this channel, so I'm halfway to my next major milestone. Thank you to everyone who is continuing to subscribe to this channel and contributing to its growth by liking videos and leaving comments. Once I get to 100,000 subscribers, my plan is to reward you all with an epic video with over 3 hours of original content. If that is the sort of thing you want to hear, please help keeping this channel to grow. If you want to support my channel even further, there are a number of ways you can do so. You can consider leaving me a tip for this video via my PayPal. Link is included in the description. Check out my Teespring store and consider purchasing one of my shirt designs. Or head over to Audible where there is a book, Punch by J.R. Park, that I narrated. I get a small royalty if you decide to purchase that. Thanks again.